Thank you so much, Candace. Thank you so much for being a guest on this show. Such a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So, Candace, there are so many accolades to talk about when it comes to you. There are so many laurels to talk about when it comes to you. There are so many accomplishments when it comes to you. But before we get there, I would like to understand the Candace that possibly most people might not be knowing. Tell me one of your memories that brings a smile on your face today as well.
Oh, good heavens. I have so many. So one that brings it, and it's a long childhood memory, but whatever. So I grew up in the military. My father was a sergeant. We traveled all over the world. And then
Hmm.
I married in the military. My ex-husband was an officer in the Air Force. And so one night we were at a party. He and I were at a party, and his new wing commander was there. And I started talking to him,
Hmm.
and he was a major in the Air Force. Major Mezzarachi was his name. And we just started chatting, and he mentioned to me, I mentioned that I was an Air Force brat. And he said how frustrated he used to get with Air Force brats. We were laughing. And he said, in fact, one time, he said, I was night duty officer at Mather Air Force Base. And one night I got a call that somebody was painting the water tower, their initials on the water tower. And he said, I chased them all over the base and I never could find them.
Hmm.
I started laughing. He said, do you want to know who it was? He said, yes, I do. I said, it was me. It was, and I named the other three people that were involved. And he said, you're kidding. And I said, no. And I
Hmm.
remember you chasing us in your car and we were running, and it was my last night there because we were going to France. So we figured, what the heck? Anyway, that one always makes me laugh. So
So, Candace, you have a background as a real estate agent without proper college education. You started the Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and then later on, you started We Save Lives. So, I'm just wondering, why was it important for you to take a stand against drunk driving?
well, because it was the second time that my family had been impacted by drunk driving.
Hmm.
The first time, Carrie's twin sister was injured, and it was my mother driving, and it was a three-car collision in which the drunk hit her from behind and threw her into another car.
Hmm.
And Serena was in one of those baby seats that weren't safe and kind of flew in the back, and she flew in the back of the station wagon and hit the glass. And so it was like the second time. And of course, the second time is when my daughter Carrie died, Serena's twin sister.
Hmm.
So I felt like enough was enough. And if I didn't do it, nobody else would, because nobody else had done anything up to that point.
Hmm.
So also, I think because I was so angry, and I wasn't as angry at the individual who killed my daughter as I was at the system that I firmly believe enabled him to continue drinking and driving.
Hmm.
And I felt so strongly against the system as it was at that time that I really felt I needed to change it.
So, tell me about that episode. And was it easy for you? I'm sure it was not. So, on one hand, there was a grief of losing your daughter. On the
Mhm.
other hand, it was a mammoth task to initiate and start something like this that would definitely challenge the systems, that would definitely challenge the existing political party. So, how did that complete episode show up in your life, and how did you manage to take that stand?
Well, in the first place, I didn't look at it as a mammoth task because I didn't understand what it was
Hmm.
exactly because of my naivete and my lack of political experience. So I wasn't even a registered voter. So I didn't see it as something that was uh, a major challenge that I had to overcome. I just sort of took it day by day and
Hmm.
started bit by bit, developed a plan, a strategy, did this, did that, and then moved on to the next thing. So I think if I had known then, uh, if I had run a business outside of my real estate business, but run a business and had some big vision in the future,
Hmm.
I probably would have been too daunting for me, but I didn't. I just sort of took it each day as it came, and I decided, okay, we're going to do this first, we're going to do this second, we're going to do this third, fourth, this is how we're going to do this, and then see what happens. and hopefully we'll change attitudes and we'll save lives.
So did you ever think that you would make such a big impact in the world?
No, in fact, when I started MAT, I met with people from NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or Transportation Safety Administration, NHTSA. And these people had been in the business for years. They were very experienced. They had doctorates, etc. And so when I when I met with them, I remember one of them said to me, Jim Nichols, he said, "Look, if you make a dent, within 10 years, I'll eat my hat." And so 3 years later at a conference, I handed him his hat. And so um, I don't think I had the same issues that other people did. And other people thought this was going to be an impossible situation. I didn't, because I didn't look at it as impossible or possible. I just looked at it as something I needed to do.
Hmm.
I didn't put judgments on it, or, it was like, I just need to do this.
Hmm. And where did you get that kind of strength, that kind of grit, that kind of determination, that kind of clarity?
Yeah. I've had so many people that have listened to webinars or podcasts or Zoom calls that haven't known me personally and have said, I can't imagine anyone else doing this. And interestingly enough, I've had people that know me personally and say the same thing. I can't imagine anybody else that could have done this. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I think probably in the beginning, at least for me, it was anger that drove me. I was very angry for a very long time. And so it was that anger and rage that kept me going more than anything else. Plus, I hate pain and grief. And so anything to avoid having to deal with the pain and the grief that I was going through.
Mm.
And I think, too, because I saw some success fairly early, that really motivated me to keep going. Despite everybody telling me that I wouldn't make a difference or it would be years and years before any change took place, I actually had examples and anecdotes of things that were happening fairly quickly that really were motivational, that said to me, you're doing the right thing and you're going about it the right way.
So I'm just trying to understand. I'm sure on one hand, there were people who were saying that you will not be able to make this possible. On the other hand, there would be few people who would have come together to support you. So if you can just help us understand one of those episodes where you were in deep dilemma, if you should continue with this cause or this movement or not, and how did you manage to be on that path and continue with the same patience, with the same...
I never had that. I was never in a deep dilemma about whether or not I should continue. It wasn't an issue for me. It was just something I did. The only time I had a tough time is when I just was overcome by grief and I wasn't sure if I could make it through the day. But I don't ever remember stopping and thinking, oh, can I go on or should I stop? I don't ever remember doing that. It was like a roller coaster. I have something I say in my speech about throwing a few pebbles and starting a rock slide or something like an avalanche. It was just, it just kept going and going and going, and more people were joining. And then even if I felt that way, which I didn't, I wouldn't have wanted to let the people down who were joining the movement, who looked to me for leadership. This was just something I really believed I had to do, knew I had to do it, and did.
And also, Candace, if I look at from those drunkard driving people, from their perspective, what do you think? What are the assumptions that they operate from before they get into the drunk driving crashes like this?
I think a lot of it is due to selfishness, the inability to make wise decisions and choices, not thinking ahead. In other words, I know alcoholics, for example, who do not drive. They drink, but they don't drive. I consider it criminal behavior. A lot of the people that I have dealt with in terms of the perpetrators or the drivers via the victims were usually repeat offenders, had done it many times before, which most of them have anyway, just haven't gotten caught. So I just think it's just criminal behavior. Some people are criminals and that's a criminal behavior and they feel like they can do it and get away with it because they may have on a number of occasions, but then look what happens. I mean, the man who killed my daughter was a multiple repeat offender. He'd had a number of crashes, including injuring somebody, but he'd never killed anybody until he killed my daughter. And he even had another drunk driving crash after he was released from the halfway house, in which he hit another woman. And I don't know what his record has been since then, but some people just never learn. They're alcoholics, but that doesn't mean that that's an excuse, because they just shouldn't drive. If they want to drink, or if they have a drinking problem, it's their problem. They get behind the wheel of the car, it becomes my problem. So, they're just not, they're not thinking, they're not using their common sense, they're not being smart.
And Candace, so the moment you realize that this is a stand that you would like to take in your life,
right?
What shifted in your life post that? The way you were looking at life, the way you were interacting with your family, with friends, with government, with the country that you are a part of. So what shifted after that?
I can't tell you what shifted. I don't quite understand what shifted, but I can tell you that I became very entrepreneurial and very involved in the cause and the issue, and it became my life, of which my children have reminded me of several times. But I mean, it really was the focus of my life. And, it was a 24-hour day, 7-day a week cause or job or whatever. But that's, if you had known me, I mean, when I got into real estate, it also was something I really focused on and did very well. I mean, that's kind of the way I am. So this was just sort of the next stage to focus on. And I did.
So you're talking about that entrepreneurial spirit, and you also spoke about the focus. That was a common thread when you went to real estate or when you got into this movement. Now, what do you think? And I personally feel that it's something like taking lead for something. So how do you define leadership in the context of a movement?
Well, I think it depends upon what kind of leadership you're talking about. If you're talking about leadership, for example, in a company, to me, it's entirely different than leadership as an activist.
Mm-hmm.
So in the context, I mean, I was both a leader in my company. MAD was a company or a corporation, and I was a leader as an activist. And believe me, the two are very different. So an activist, a leader as an activist, needs to keep their eye on the goal, know how to compromise, know how to work with others, understand both sides of the issue, and is somebody who can make the decisions. Whereas a leader in a company usually is obligated to a board of directors or to whatever it is. I mean, it is my leadership in the corporation of MAD. Technically, I was supposed to report to the board, but activists, to me, shouldn't report to anybody except their followers in order to stay true and pure. And that's. So I'm not sure that answered your question, but to me, there are two different types of leaders.
And if you were to look at leadership from the movement perspective, because you're known as somebody who have started the movement so successfully, which is running worldwide. Mm-hmm. So from that context, how would you define leadership? What kind of leadership is required to start a movement?
Well, that's part of my course. And so I really don't want to go into the whole aspects of what it takes, but it does take determination, and it takes the ability to inspire and motivate. And again, it takes the ability to see both sides of the issue. I work with a number of movements, or not even movements, causes. And one of the failings that I see in the causes that don't succeed is the inability of either the founders or the leaders or the executive directors of the board or whatever to look realistically at the other side and know how to deal effectively with that. They're very one-sided. And although it's good, I mean, everybody used to say, and me too, I had right on my side, and the press used to say I had God, motherhood, and apple pie. You still need to understand where the other side is coming. If there is another side, where the other side is coming from, how to overcome the obstacles, how to overcome the challenges, and how to be realistic enough so that you have credibility.
So, very important point you have mentioned. And you spoke about how to inspire people, how to motivate people. I'm sure it's not easy to pull people together for the cause that you really care for, because people have their own jobs to take care of, people have their own families to take care of, they have their own issues that they have to take care of on day-to-day basis. So how did you manage to pull all the people together and keep your eyes focused on the cause that you really cared for?
I think I was a mother who lost a child, so I had immediate credibility.
Hmm.
B, I was very solution oriented, and so I kept my eyes on the goal, on what it is I wanted to do, which made it easy for people to follow because most people agreed with me. And the other thing, I was able to start a movement that had a grassroots component to it, a major grassroots component. We couldn't have done this if it was just me. It was because of the grassroots. It was because of the other mothers, predominantly mothers, but fathers too, who joined in and believed in what I was doing. And in terms of how I was able to do it, it was because I listened to what everyone had to say. And I actually, in some cases, made some changes maybe in something because of somebody else that was doing something I thought was really good or better than I was doing. I was incredibly flexible, and somebody called me Mrs. Smith Goes to Washington. But I think the advantage of my naivete, and I've heard this from others, is that I have the ability to listen to everyone and then to make decisions and to see who had something good to say and should we incorporate it or not. And in many cases they did. And I think too, because eventually it didn't happen overnight, but was getting, I was being honored, or I was being treated with respect or whatever by governors and presidents and so forth. Obviously, people in high places believed in what I was doing and saw the worth in what I was doing, which helped give me even more credibility. I don't think people saw me as just this hysterical mother, because I didn't cry in public, who was, off running a cause. I don't believe I was ever viewed that way. And I've never seen that or heard that in the media or from others. I was viewed as someone who lost a child, wanted to solve a problem, and went about solving it.
And that requires a very deep level of understanding, awareness about yourself. Because there was a cause that you were operating from, and not only operating from a space of grief or hurt, right? Or anger for that matter.
Well, there was a lot of anger there, but there was also, I'm very practical and realistic and pragmatic. And so it was, was a very step-by-step way of looking at things. We have to deal with the problem in the local level, so we're going to do this. It's a national problem, so we're going to do this. Plus, I did a ton of research. And in those days, we didn't have the internet, you didn't have computers, you didn't have any of this. So it took a lot longer, believe me. But I did a ton of research, and I looked at what solutions were working in other countries or other states, and then decided, well, let's see if we can make that work here in California. And California at the time was sort of a leader state. So what we did in California, other states emulated.
Yeah. And Candace, now you are involved in another NGO. It's known as We Save Lives. So how is We Save Lives different from the MAD, that Mothers Against Drunk Driving, that you started?
We Save Lives. Yeah, We Save Lives is not a grassroots organization. Once for me was enough. And we don't have chapters around the country. Again, once was enough. And it is kind of, I call it a mom and mom corporation, in which I'm the main person. We have speakers that actually speak around the country. We have volunteers that speak. We're not a massive movement, but we also focus on the 3 Ds: drunk, drugged, and distracted driving. So we don't focus just on drunk or drugged. We do all 3 Ds because they all seem to tie into each other.
Hmm.
And because I've been victimized by all three. My daughter was killed by a drunk driver. My son was run over by a drugged driver. And I broke my back via a distracted driver. So all three driving behaviors have impacted myself and my family. And we work on education. We have some wonderful PSAs, which we have Reflections from Inside, which has been seen hundreds of millions of times around the world. And we have a number of good campaigns that I love, but not while driving, the courage to intervene, etc. But we're not a massive, give us $1 million type organization, which could be my failing, but.
Or that could be a choice as well.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of, I do need to improve my fundraising, actually.
Okay.
But I mean, it's not, I would rather work on the issue than, do all this fundraising, whatever. I'm just more focused on the issue.
Yeah. So Candace, help me understand, what was the primary reason to switch from MAD and start another initiative?
Oh, I left MAD many years ago, and I just started We Save Lives about 4 or 5 years ago. I can't remember exactly when. So there was a big length of time between my leaving MAD and starting We Save Lives. And when I left, I wanted to write a book, which I did, Giving Sorrow Words: How to Cope with Grief and Get On with Your Life, which really was a big focus for me. It took a number of years because I traveled around the country researching grief and interviewing people from all over. It's a beautiful book, a sharing of stories. And then I became a consultant, and I have this belief, and still do, that anyone can do what I did if they just go about it in the right way. So I worked with other organizations, and which I really enjoyed. And it was that consulting which led me back into We Save Lives.
Thank you for sharing that. And that is, in fact, I wanted to check with you, because there are so many people that I come across. They said we don't have the necessary education to start a new initiative. We don't have the funding to start our initiative. We don't have the backing. We are not from the affluent family. And people have 10 different reasons, or we may call it excuses, not to initiate something. So without any educational background, without funding, without any godfather, how did you manage to do that? Or what advice would you offer to people who are looking for a reason or funding or education background?
Well, in the first place, I was saying, and that's that real activists don't say I can't, they say I can, and find out how to do it. So people that want to make excuses usually aren't activists. They're not going to be an activist. Activists are people who immediately start thinking, we have a problem, let's find solutions. Let me figure out how I'm going to go about doing this. I did not have a college education. I didn't get paid for the first 2 years. I didn't come from an affluent family. And in fact, at one point in time, my family and I were eligible for welfare, and we used to joke about it. I didn't get major funding in the beginning. I just had I had a cause that was very important to me. And it meant a lot to me. And it was something that I really, really wanted to do. And I didn't even think in terms of making a difference. I did think in terms of protecting my other children from being killed by a drunk driver, just because of the history that I'd had. So that was very strong within me. But it was, okay, this is the problem. Now, here are the solutions after I did a ton of research. So let's go about getting those implemented.
And any specific reason for not starting chapters for We Save Lives in other countries?
Oh, God. Yeah, but without, it's a very, unfortunately, MAD did away with their chapters, and they did away with their grassroots, and they became nothing more than a bureaucracy. And I really think that was a shame. And this happened after I left. But even while I was there for 5.5 years, we were starting to have issues with the chapters towards the end of my time. It's really hard to control. In many cases, all of these entities, and I had them all over the country and in other countries as well. And you end up spending a lot of your time dealing with their problems and their issues. And with all due respect to women, many of the women who started these chapters had not been in the workforce, had not run a business, did not know how to delegate, were very grief-stricken over their child's death. And in time, those chapters have to become a little mini business. You can be grassroots, but then you also have to know how to handle the funding, how to handle the volunteers, how to do all these other things. And I'm sure that could have happened, but you end up spending so much time teaching people how to do that you're not focused on the cause as much. I do think, and I'm glad that we were grassroots, because again, we couldn't have done what we did without, God love them, those people and those amazing people. But I think you have to, in my case, what we did is sort of anoint them. So I think from the get-go, if you want to do this, you have to set up clear-cut policies, clear-cut guidelines from the very beginning. And I simply didn't want to go through that again. And ironically, I've been approached by a lot of the ex-MAD chapters and MAD
I'm
people.
sure.
To start, we save lives around the country. And I don't, number one, I'm too old, to go through all that again. I just don't want to do that. I have no interest.
I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, I wish them well, and they should start what they want to start, and I'll, guide them, but that's it.
Yeah. So Candace, if you were to look at now the journey that you started and the journey that you had with MAD, or the journey that you are having with We Save Lives, I'm just wondering if you were to define that these are the different phases of starting a movement, nurturing a movement, and making sure that movement adds value to the world. So how would you define those phases?
Starting a movement, how would I define starting a movement?
Yeah.
It's you start a movement. I'm not sure exactly. I mean, we've already talked about starting a movement is, getting it off the ground, just starting the movement, going forward. I mean, deciding what it is you want to do and how you want to go about doing it and where you want to do it and who you want to be involved with and who you want involved with you. I mean, that's a whole course. So, you can't just say, oh, you're going to do this and start a movement. That really is a whole course. That's a whole, long involved process. I mean, look at, and we've talked about this before. I look at these movements today and they're not movements because they don't move. They do this and then that's it. So you can't just start a movement. It really is a whole process.
So what do you think was the biggest hurdle? As you mentioned, there are so many movements you see and they don't move. So what do you think is the biggest breaker in that movement that stops them from growing and making the difference, making the dent that they really care for, that they're meant for?
Right. Lack of leadership. That's it. They don't have a leader, or they don't have a strong leader.
Tell me more about that.
Well,
When you're saying that lack of leadership, tell me more about that.
I mean, who is the leader of the Black Lives Movement? Who is the leader of the Me Too movement? Who are the leaders of all of these movements? I see them march and then that's it. I see a bunch of people talk and then that's it. There's no clear-cut leader. And I was, for 5.5 years, I was the leader. And I say that, and I know sometimes people weren't always thrilled about it, but it got the job done. You need, and we're strongly lacking leadership in this country right now. And if we'd had leadership, I don't think the COVID problem would be as serious as it is. We really do lack leaders. And so without a clear-cut leader that everyone can follow, there's no clear direction. There's no clear movement to the next step because nobody knows what the next step is. In fact, I was reading an article about the protests in Oregon and what's going on there. And they were talking about the fact that there are no leaders. And, people get up and talk, but so what? You need someone that not only can lead people, but guide them through the steps, each step, so that you go from this protest to this, to this, to this, to this. And it isn't there.
And who has been your inspiration? Any political leader, any business leader that has inspired you?
No, I don't have one. I get
Interestingly,
asked that question all the time. I think everybody's so disappointed. You have
yeah.
to understand, when I started MAD, we didn't have the kind of mass communications we do now, so I didn't know who was doing what.
Hmm.
I didn't know if there were any other movements around. I had no clue. So I had nobody to follow or emulate. Someone I do admire very much that I met later on is Ralph Nader, someone I've worked with. But at the time, I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what he was doing. I didn't know any of that. So my inspiration in the beginning was, I just didn't, you know, I just didn't have it. And because I wasn't political, because I didn't vote, because I didn't know who was who, I certainly couldn't, and I certainly wouldn't anyway, look at a politician as a leader or
Hmm.
somebody I would like to follow. Several of them I met later on, I came to admire and respect, but nobody inspired me, frankly.
Hmm. Interestingly, while I was listening to you, you mentioned a leader is somebody who can inspire the other people, who can actually guide the other people. And then you mentioned about the clarity that he's bringing or she's bringing for the cause that we are talking about. And very often I come across people, they are leading initiatives, they are leading organizations, but what I hear is, or what I don't find is that clarity that you are talking about. So is it very often that you come across people with a lot of clarity, or is it that I have never been able to meet many people who have that clarity that they are seeking for or the world is seeking for from them?
No, I agree with you. I get calls every week from people who want to do something, some cause or another, usually based on a personal story. And when I ask them, okay, what is it you want to do? Have you thought about how you want to go about it? And no, they want to talk to me, and I'm not going to tell them what to do and how to do it. It's not my cause, and I wasn't
Mm,
impacted by it. Or I'll send them back and I'll say, why don't you do some research and then look at some things you want to do, and then we'll talk, and then they'll come back and they really haven't done the research. That's one of the biggest problems I see, but they really haven't done the research, or they want to do it so badly they don't really care what anybody else is doing
mm,
because they think they know how to do it and they don't, which is another big problem. I call it founder syndrome. And so I actually have, I don't think in all the years I've mentored people, I don't think I have come across anyone who was really clear in their view
mm,
of not just what they wanted to do, but how they wanted to do it,
mm,
and or even understood the obstacles. I had someone contact somebody. I'm sure she won't listen to this, but I had somebody email me the other day, and she had this major plan to 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 just to reduce drunk driving. In this case, it was highway safety, although I deal with a number of issues. In this case, it was drunk driving because of her family history. And she laid out this very complicated plan and this legislation that she wanted to pass and get introduced. And the plan was so complicated, and furthermore, it never would have happened because of liability issues and lawsuits and insurance problems. And I had to go back and say, realize that nobody's going to do this because of liability issues. And she had, oh, okay. And then I had somebody else contact me, and she wanted to get a bill introduced via reducing violence in the police, reducing police violence towards African Americans. And, and she said, I said, well, tell me the bill. Tell me what you want to do. Well, I want to get a bill passed. I said, well, what is the bill going to say? Well, she wasn't quite sure, but she wanted to get, I said, well, in the first place, kind of what you've outlined to me probably won't get passed, and it certainly won't get signed by Trump.
mm.
And he said, because of his political leanings. And she said, well, he doesn't have to sign it. It just has to be, just has to pass the Senate.
Mm.
I said, no, that's not how a bill works, God love her.
Yeah.
So I mean, people are motivated, but then, they want to do something, but then they're not sure what they want to do. And when people don't follow them because they don't know what they want to do, they get very disappointed. I see this
Yeah.
all the time, and
Yeah.
they don't understand why it's falling apart. Anyway.
Yes. So what is your advice to those people? Because I personally come across a lot of people who have some hint of the area that they would like to explore, and yet they are not very clear about the idea that they would like to work on, or they're not clear about the kind of challenges that they might come across or as you mentioned about what and the how part of it. So what's your piece of advice to those people?
Well, my whole course, both my courses on activism and making a movement move, deal with those issues.
Hmm.
So I don't want to go into, what's going to take hours in the course. But the first thing I always tell people when they call me is go research. Research what it is you want to do, see who's doing what, and see if there's a way you can fit in before you decide to go off and start your own. But know
Hmm.
what's out there, and most people don't. And so that's my first piece of advice is go research the issue, whether it's sex trafficking. I've dealt with all of the issues,
Hmm.
child endangerment, molestation, whatever. I've dealt with it, believe me.
Hmm.
Then you need to go out and find out, okay, is somebody doing this? Has it been effective? Has it not been effective? If not, why not? What are the obstacles? A lot of people don't want to put that kind of time and effort
Hmm.
into finding out whether or not what they want to do will work. They just want to do it. They get all gung-ho. And I started MAD. Carrie was killed May 3rd. I started MAD May 7th. I didn't announce it until August, I think it was 17th. So from May 7th to July until August 17th, I was researching this issue. I mean it. I was researching. I knew the California Vehicle Code better than most district attorneys did.
Hmm.
I knew the laws in California better than lawyers did and defense attorneys did. Plus, I knew what other states were doing.
Hmm.
I knew what the police were doing. I knew how they thought. I knew this stuff. So I didn't need a college education, but I did need to know how to read, understand, and find the answers. And that's what I did. And that's what I encourage other people to do.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Makes sense. Hmm. So, what is the cause that you're working on now, apart from We Save Lives?
We Save Lives is my cause, and then I'm working on the course, and that's how to be an activist, an effective activist, and
Yeah.
how to build a sustainable movement that moves. And that's enough for me. If I ruled the world and I could get involved in other causes, I would end racial discrimination. I would end discrimination against anyone who's gender whatever confused or gender different or whatever. I would end any kind of prejudice because I don't like it. I don't believe in it. I wasn't raised that way. I don't agree with it. I didn't raise my family that way.
Hmm.
And I just can't stand prejudice. I really can't. I always say if I come back in the next world, I'll do this, this, and this. And probably the third thing would be to end the war in the Middle East, obviously. See, this is, if I were gone, I would bring Arabs and Jews together because I worked on that issue after I left MAB. That was my issue because I'm an Arab American. So I worked with Jews and other American Arabs on peace in the Middle East, and we worked on initiatives and had discussion groups, which I loved. I think they're the greatest things since sliced bread. So,
In
those
fact,
would be
considering today's time, a lot of people have started to work towards bringing humanity together, bringing peace together in the world. If you were to address this issue of bringing peace and bringing the humanity together, how would you address this?
Well, I'm a firm believer in discussion groups. I mean, I look at what's happening in Oregon and other places where they're sending in troops, which I disagree with. And instead of negotiation, we have escalation. So I really do, like when we did our dialogue groups, we brought Arabs and Jews together to talk to one another. We had professional facilitators, but then we would send like an Arab and a Jew out into the community to talk in the schools. And it was absolutely amazing the impact that it had, because students who felt strongly about this or thought that all Arabs and Jews hated each other saw a completely different story and realized, yes, there were differences, but there were also similarities that could be discussed intelligently. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we have in this country is that we do not dialogue, we do not discuss, we argue and escalate, we go right into violence. And I just think we could do a lot more with negotiation, with discussion. And that's where you need leaders, though, for example. And that is to inspire people to do that, to propose it to the leaders of the other side, if there is another side, and then to work together on meeting and setting the ground rules and what you can do. And even though you may not solve the problem or end all the animosity, I do firmly believe if it's done appropriately, that you can, in fact, keep it from escalating, keep it from becoming violent, because violence doesn't solve anything. The focus then becomes on the violence and not on the cause. You lose sight of the cause because you're focused on the violence.
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely, yes. I think having meaningful dialogue, it can serve a lot of things in life, and most of the things, if not all.
Right.
So Candace, today, with all the wisdom that you have, with all the experiences that you have gone through, all the ups and the downs that you have gone through, all the accomplishment that you've had, the kind of travel that you have done in the world, and I understand you have traveled 21 countries. If you were to offer a piece of advice to your 21-year-old self, what would that be?
Oh, geez. To my 21-year-old self, I think it would be I'm a big believer in volunteerism, because I think when you volunteer for others, you see a different side of society, and can be very enlightening and eye-opening. I think sometimes people are too focused on themselves and their own world. So I think it would be to volunteer, find issues that you care about, and to volunteer. And I don't think you need to change the world, but just volunteering for a community cause can make a difference and make you feel better, and other people feel better as well. So I'm a big believer in volunteering, which is something I did do before I started MAD. So it would be volunteering.
Beautiful. Thank you. So when you volunteer, you see a different side of society. You see different perspectives. And that's a piece of advice that you would offer to your 21-year-old self.
Yeah, it would be. I mean, I was volunteering at 21, but that would be my advice to me.
Yeah. And Candace, now, as of today, what do you know for sure with 100% certainty?
Oh, I know people can make a difference. I know absolutely people can make a difference. I know people can change the world. I know that.
So thank you so much, Candace, I think, for this wonderful conversation and sharing a part of your life, which is very, very close to your heart. And I personally have learned a lot from all the conversations that I've had with you. So whether it's all about starting volunteering for something that you really care for, bringing people together, taking leadership about something that you really care for at the deepest core of your heart, and making it happen. I think something that I'm taking away from this conversation is that take a stand and make that happen. You might come across certain challenges, does not really matter. Face it, take the next step. Because I'm sure when you are clear about what you really care for, you'll be able to pull people together and make it a reality in this world. Thank you so much, Candace, for your time once again.
No, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.